Hello, I'm Jeremy Waak, and welcome to my studio here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I studied metalsmithing in our college, and I learned to work metal in many ways, from traditional to contemporary techniques, precise hand skills with hammers, files, and saws, to machine tools and digital tools. I've worked in precious metal jewelry and functional objects, architectural elements, and fine art sculpture. I've even repaired and restored antiques. In my personal work, I attempt to balance, combine, or to rectify two seemingly opposed interests or loves of mine, nature, biology, and the wilderness, with machines, mechanics, and engineering. While my work tends to look very formal and serious, I often add humor through ridiculousness in function or a silly stated purpose. To see how I do this, let's take a look at a few of my sculptures.
Willow oak, kinetic tree sculpture. These are designed to shift in the wind. They're sitting inside self-lubricating nylon bushings, aluminum, pinned and screwed together for lightness. In addition to the leaves and their function in the wind, moving in all kinds of different directions to mimic a tree. We also have articulations at the branches, so that when the wind will start to really blow, these can move. They have custom stainless steel spring actuators, modeled after shock absorbers on motorcycles, without the oil movement absorbing mechanism, the spring and piston mechanisms. And the springs are set up to balance out, create some buoyancy to the arms. The sculpture takes inspiration from a willow oak tree, which is a native to this area, but one that's considered endangered. Although the willow oak is a very popular landscaping tree in other parts of the country, here in one of its native areas, it's not seen very much. So I thought it was valuable to use a native tree that has some specific scarcity issues here as an educational purpose, the science factory. But also the willow is oftentimes considered a tree of memorial. The sculpture being commissioned in memoriam of a mother made sense. And the oak is traditionally a tree that's strength and resiliency, has some other beneficial meanings. So the willow oak kind of combines multiple aspects conceptually that were important, I think, for this location and this sculpture. To help guide the design of it, we actually planted a willow oak sapling in our backyard, which gave me a close and personal reference. And I could go out and inspect that tree and come back. So the growth pattern of the sculpture is mimicked after the growth pattern of the willow oak sapling. So combining mechanical aesthetics with nature's aesthetics, observations of machines and structures, observations of trees and plants. I'm interested in balancing those two. So we have a space frame structure, a way of making light, rigid forms used in airplanes and older race cars, things like that. But I want it to still flow with some plant theory, plant structure behind it. So at the base, very large, thick stainless steel base plate, laser cut for strength and rigidity. The bolts to anchor it to the ground come through that plate. The structure is welded to it, but I wanted the structure to flow from the ground, so the base plate grabs from the inside, allowing the visual line of the structure to grow up straight from the earth. You don't see hidden underground a giant concrete foundation that goes 4 feet into the ground to anchor it. That's the point. point is to allow it to look like it's arising right out of the ground and flowing up. I'm using repetitive structures all the way up the form, but I'm changing proportions ever slightly as the structure grows upwards, becomes ever more slender. And then the point is to get the limbs to look like they're growing right out of the structure. So I'm combining a mechanical technique that you would find in the swing arm of a motorcycle with the flow and the proportions of a tree growing. And the goal is to get it to come look like it's got that point in a tree where the limb swells just as it leaves the trunk and then narrows down into the structure. The way that a limb will swell where it branches off as well. Almost as if the energy gathers in that spot before it splits into the different branches and such. The angles chosen here, they're repetitive angles based off of these angles, based off of these angles, and that all comes from observation of actual trees, especially the willow oak sapling that we put in our backyard just as the project beginning. So this is sculpture is the first in a new series of work for me that I want to continue, and so I'm going to be creating a series of saplings. I'm going to call them 3-leaf, smaller versions, same sort of mechanics, same aesthetics in general, but I'm going to work on refining some of the movements and the kinetic of them, and really excited about the possibilities that might lead to.
Coping is the cutting of curved ends to tubing or rod so that you can assemble it to other curved surfaces in like building space frames, roll cages. In this case, I'm using the lathe to cope the end of this stainless steel tubing. I've chucked the tubing into the boring bar holder, and that gives me a nice, solid, repeatable placement. Here I'm silver soldering some brass rod together. I've placed the solder chip using a titanium pick, and now I'm going to continue to heat the brass until the chip flows into the joint. Stainless steel is one of my favorite materials to work with. Here I'm TIG welding the components together to make the trunk of the willow oak sculpture. It's a bit of a tight spot. And here I'm testing the spring rates on the articulated limbs for the willow oak, making sure that they're going to balance out the weight, giving me the movement that I'm looking for.
I grew up in Nebraska on the Central Plains of the United States, descendant of homesteaders and farmers. And I grew up with that mentality of hard work, of do it yourself, the frontier persona. And
had a big impact on me growing up. My father is an auto mechanic. He's just partially retired now in his mid-70s. He still goes in 4 days a week. I think he does it because it's what he loves. I remember when I was young, he told me, I left my studies in engineering at the university because I wanted to work more with my hands. And even though he could have made a lot more money as an engineer, he told me that there's never been a Monday he didn't want to go to work. That was really influential on me. The idea of choosing a vocation, a path through life that was about what you loved, the hard work of what you loved, versus other material trophies or accomplishments. I had always been praised for my artistic ability since as early as I can remember in school. It was the one thing that I think I got positive reviews for. But it wasn't until after high school that I really came to see myself studying art seriously, making a career as an artist. I always take art classes all the way through school. It was a major focus of mine. But I hadn't really thought about it as a vocation much. There were a couple of things that became turning points for me in that. One was in the middle of high school, a new class was offered, a jewelry class. Now, I had no real idea what jewelry was. I didn't pay attention to jewelry much. Obviously wasn't a customer for jewelry, anything like that. But I was fascinated with gemstones and the idea of their preciousness. So I enrolled in this jewelry class and fell in love with working with the metal, and had a bit of a knack at it, actually. Pretty standard beginning metals things, jewelry pieces, like this necklace with cut and soldered together components. And I won an award for this necklace at the National Scholastics. And so I think that that kind of encouragement had an influence on me. So after I graduated from high school and a little unclear of my path, I didn't go to college right away, which is sort of the standard practice in the States. I took a couple of years off. The first year, I didn't do any schooling at all. I was tired of school. I needed a break from it. I had a job at a bakery for a while, and then I ended up working with my father in his repair shop, working on cars. And the entire time, I maintained a studio downtown. First one was above a biker bar, which was a good time, being up late, painting, listening to music, and then watching all of the bikers come out of the building after the bar closed and drunkenly attempting to start their motorcycles and ride off into the darkness. The second year, I had a studio at a house shared with a number of guys near the university campus. And it was in that second year post high school that my parents encouraged me to take some classes in something. They definitely didn't want me to drift off. So I enrolled in a couple of classes at the university, a drawing class, a 2D design class. And then there was also a short class on gemology, learning about reflectivity or refractivity, the cleavage of stones. And it kept me interested in that. And then I decided, I should go to art college and pursue a career as an artist. So I sent out my applications. I was really looking for 4-year colleges that had metals as a major, because my experience in high school with the jewelry, I felt like I really wanted to pursue that, while at the same time maintaining this romantic notion in the back of my head that I was going to be a painter. That aspect of painting being a primary artistic pursuit. I never did really mature well as a painter. I had some pretty terrible critiques in art college about my two-dimensional work. Not the realistic drawing stuff that I always had a talent for, but it was more of the creative, non-representational work in 2 dimensions. Just wasn't working. I wasn't doing well at that. But I was pursuing the metalsmithing. I had a lot of fun working in the metals program, in the metals facility. The professor,
Richard Prilliman,
was a very skillful craftsman and a very powerful personality. I got along well with him, and it was a great place to be. I studied pretty standard metalsmithing techniques, building on my introduction in high school. So working with raising and soldering to make small vessels. Or I started to get very interested in simple mechanisms. Mechanical background, working with my father, his love of motor racing, Formula One and motorcycles. And so I started developing some interest in mechanics, and they were very simple at first. Simple boxes with sliding lids that opened and closed. This one inspired by a shark egg that I had found washed up on the shore. And in that pursuit of simple mechanics, the opening and closing of a container that was fascinating to me, I stumbled across the beginning of my professional pursuit. A friend of mine and I were in my studio space in the metals department, and I was showing him a little container that I had made. There was just a simple couple of domed forms that I had hinged so they could slide open and closed. Very simple experimentation. At some point in the conversation, it occurred to us that this resembled a contraption to pop popcorn in, and that maybe we could pop one kernel of popcorn in this container. So my friend carved the handle for it, and the next week we went to the cafeteria where the students would eat lunch, and we asked for a little bit of vegetable oil, and we put a couple of drops in, and one kernel of popcorn, and we put that in there as well, and closed it up, and with a little cigarette lighter as the heat source, we tried to see if we could make it work. And the first experiment was a dismal failure. The popcorn just sort of burned and charred and smoked and made this horrific smell, and didn't do what we wanted at all. And my friend, after having carved the handle in the first experiment, was pretty much done with it. He had other interests to pursue, and it hadn't worked as intended, so he was out of there. But I, on the other hand, I really felt like there was potential. I thought, well, maybe I could redesign the piece. So I set about making a new, improved design. So I set about deepening the chamber, making the chamber out of a thicker material, creating a little finger pole to open and close the lid, and then I revisited the experiment. I put a couple of drops of vegetable oil in there. I put one kernel of popcorn in there. I closed the lid, put my cigarette lighter underneath it, and lo and behold, this time it actually worked with a neat little boop, and there was a popped kernel of popcorn inside. It was fascinating and exciting to see that the experiment had worked, that my re-engineering of the design led to success. And I was really excited, so I started, showing my professor and my friends, and popping a lot of popcorn, and everyone seemed very interested in it. It was funny, it was silly, it was ridiculous, but it worked. actually came to realize that the humor, the absurdity of it had legs, and the story of this device that I had made started to filter through the school, and I became a bit of a notoriety because of it. And then it led to a series of works where I was making a lot of different popcorn poppers. So I started playing around with fancier ways of opening and closing them, you know, with levers and gears pulled out of cameras or other devices. And I wasn't popping corn in any of these. I was designing them so they could work theoretically, but I wasn't that interested in the popping of corn. It was more the mechanisms that I was fascinated with. And so I did a whole series of different mechanisms, and they were very successful. I got into some exhibitions outside of school, got onto a postcard for one of the exhibitions, and then actually ended up getting accepted into grad school based on that body of work. I had taken 2 years off between high school and college, but I was done taking some time off. I wanted to continue my studies. So after college, I went straight into grad school. I didn't take time off, which is sort of the norm in the States. Instead, I needed a facility to work in. I had very few tools of my own, so I needed to have a facility to work in. And I also wanted to push my ideas further. And I figured in grad school, I was going to be challenged, and I looked forward to that challenge. And that's actually exactly how it came about. I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, fantastic program. And I studied under Professor Richard Maudsley, world-renowned metalsmith, an amazing mentor, really patient, warm human. And I was given a lot of space to pursue my work there. To start, I figured I would finish some of the work that I had still left over from undergraduate. I had a few popcorn popper ideas I had started, and so I figured this is a perfect place to pick up in grad school. So I started with one that was based around the idea of using a plastic tube as a storage container for popcorn before it was to be popped in the chamber. And so it was very much a design exercise utilizing this plastic tube. And so I did. I finished it up to the best of my ability. And then I had another very important moment. One of the third-year grad students came to my studio for a one-on-one critique. And he was looking over what I'd worked on. I had just finished this. And he was not impressed. He had a lot of complaints, things that he saw that I had done that he felt were not up to the standards necessary for the program. And that was a pretty hard critique. But rather than be defeated, I was actually very motivated by it. I was like, okay, let's see what I can do. So I cut back into the piece and reworked all the areas that he had been critical of. And in the end, the result actually was a huge improvement. It was a very big deal for me. He was right. Things like having an edge rather than the perforation of this vented space exposed, and reinforcing the door to the chamber so that it seems very robust and purposeful. These were great improvements, refinements to the piece, and I very much appreciated that. Coming up to adversity and then pushing through it, taking it on as a challenge. has been a big motivator in my career ever since. When I left grad school, I had no intention to ever become a professor, to teach myself. Then when I moved to the East Coast, I didn't know anybody in town, didn't really know anything about the city. I'd moved here kind of by accident almost. Found out that there was an art college in the town. I went down to the art college and I just submitted some, a CV and some postcards from exhibitions and things like that. And I said I was interested in employment opportunities, whatever that means. And about a week later, I get a phone call. The chair of the foundation department for all the first year students needed somebody to teach 3D design. And so she called me in for an interview. And at the end of the interview, she offered me the position as an adjunct, teach this 3D design class to the foundation students. I thought, well, that's kind of a fun opportunity. I don't really, other than as a teaching assistantship in grad school, I know very little about what this is going to be like. And as I continue to do in my life, I tend to just take advantage of these opportunities. They come up, they seem interesting. If it's an opportunity to learn something, I tend to jump at it, take it. I had no idea that would lead to 16 years in higher education, 12 years as a full-time professor. 10 of those, almost 11 of those, I think, were actually as a department chair of the foundation department. What does it mean to be a functioning member of an academic community? What are my responsibilities? My artwork almost became this second job that I had. The first job was being a professor. The second job was being an artist. I focused on the academic side of things as my primary interest. Learning to write a valuable syllabus, detailed course calendar, assignment sheets that provided information to help the students navigate their tasks. And meanwhile, my art practice became very narrowly focused. I felt that, okay, as a professor, my artwork needed to be an example of what I was hoping my students would be able to achieve, right? Work ethic, be there early, be prepared, do enough homework ahead of time to know where to begin, to have things set up, to communicate clearly intentions and in goals, to give feedback that was not just, oh, here's a bunch of artists that I know the names of for you to go look at, but actually learning to ask questions. What is it that you intend with this? And are you meeting that intention? And if not, how might you alter what you're doing so that you can meet your intention? So rather than make something and then figure out what it means afterwards, think about what it is you want to say as an artist and then develop your voice to go in that direction. I took that back into my studio practice. And so there was a lot of thinking. What is it that I want to say? How do I say it? Researching what it is that I'm trying to say, researching the background of it, the vocabulary of it, the historical references of it. And then after I left the college, left academia, and struck out again as a full-time studio artist, it occurred to me that my attention to academia, to being a professor and setting an example for the students, that very, very narrow focused studio practice that came out of that behavior as a professor was really inauthentic to who I was. Because at the core of it all, I'm a maker. I'm a maker of things. So I make sculptures. I make conceptually driven fine art gallery pieces. But I also make things that just are functional or necessary. So I think being a professor taught me a great deal about what I didn't want to do as an artist. I've just very recently got back into the classroom. Now I'm back as an adjunct. I was recruited by another college to come in and teach a sculpture class for them just for the semester. And I thought it would be a fun experiment to see if my opinions of teaching were still valid. I'm really focusing on what is the results of what the students are accomplishing. You know, how can I engage with each student as their own artist, find what their goals are, and guide them towards learning as much as possible to that end. Just make cool things. Just let someone else figure out what it means. And keep the art historians and the critics employed. So that's where I'm back to. And I feel more like myself than I have in over a decade. It's amazing. Just make stuff. Make good stuff. Have fun. Oh, I want to make this. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm just going to make it.